bridge. But he doesn't know, he doesn't get out there, he doesn't see it the night of the 18th when he arrives. In fact, Dan McCook never saw Reed's Bridge himself.
Just what the 69th Ohio guys did.
As they had deployed the evening before, the 85th Illinois deployed 2 companies forward as skirmishers, guarding both their left and their front and the front of the battery. The 52nd Ohio deployed 2 companies forward as skirmishers, guarding their front and the left of the 86th Illinois. The 86th Illinois deployed 2 companies, Company B and I, as skirmishers, guarding the right front of the 86th Illinois and the 86th Illinois' right flank. Company I is going to be deployed as skirmishers, and we're going to walk down in that direction in a minute. They're going to be deployed out in that direction as skirmishers, and they're actually going to be facing south towards, as it turned out, the 1st Georgia Cavalry guys. So if you can kind of imagine in front of the line here an arc of skirmishers, the 52nd Ohio guys right out here, probably right at the edge of the field that we took time to learn about. And then you've got the 86th Illinois guys curved around. You don't see very many more references to the skirmishers until later on. At the end of all of this, you get some complaints by some of the regimental commanders and even some of the skirmishers about when McCook left. They were not told that McCook was leaving. But when McCook began to reorient and face to the south, the skirmish line also begins to reorient and face to the south. And so we have the best description of this from Company B of the 86th Illinois. They are actually going to wheel and face southward, which brings them closer to the spring. And that the 52nd Ohio guys, I don't have any evidence of this, but it would be logical. 52nd Ohio guys probably wheeled to face south also, and so McCook now at dawn is reorienting in this direction. The 52nd Ohio has an interesting description. They formed in line of battle, and they are going to change front to the rear on the right company. Get Casey's Tactics out and start reading, and you'll understand what he just said. But that basically was in each company, the command was given about, face, and they turn and face to the rear. The file closers, who had been back there, now run around and form back there. The rear rank is now the front rank, and now the the southernmost company, which had been the right company, is now going to be the left company. It now does a wheel until it faces in the desired direction, and then each of the other companies both wheel and move in echelon, and now the line is formed. And once they've done that, they shift 150 yards further to the east. So there was a lot of movement in here. But McCook now reorients to the south as there's an increasing amount of skirmish fire out there on the skirmish line. And the 69th Ohio is going out to burn Reed's Bridge. Sometime before dawn, there is a Confederate reconnaissance in this area by John Pegram, one of Forrest's brigade, now division commanders. Pegram will ride forward and rides into the Union lines, where he learns that he is between an Illinois regiment and a Ohio regiment. So probably up the corridor of the Reed's Bridge Road, then turned and rode away. But that helps to then, as we'll find out, draw Confederates up into this area on the morning of the...
Pegram's not discovered in that movement. The Federals don't realize he's a Confederate. Confederate.
Yeah.
One other quick thing about Pegram. Technically, the brigade, the Confederate Cavalry Brigade, is now commanded by Brigadier General Henry B. Davidson. But Davidson only arrives on the battlefield on the morning of the 19th. Before this, he's been a staff officer in Stanton, Virginia, and he was promoted and sent south back in August. But it's taken him a long time to get here. So Pegram is going to be referred to as both a divisional commander and a brigade commander. One of the men in Pegram's brigade will later say that we were commanded starting on the 19th by Henry B. Davidson, but we didn't really know Davidson, and we often forgot that we were no longer Pegram's brigade. And a couple of Pegram staff officers are assigned to Davidson, and one of them, Henry Clay, says that Davidson is so new on the ground that Pegram is in effect acting as brigade commander. Now he's a division commander, but his other brigade is off to the north, and he has no direct contact with that. So basically, he's kind of playing a dual role here, but mostly as a brigade commander.
And soon, for a few minutes, Davidson's brigade is essentially going to have 3 brigade commanders: Davidson, Pegram, and Forrest.
Forrest is not a hands-off kind of guy.
Questions, observations? Remember, 69th Ohio is marching out there towards Reed's Bridge. They're going to get out there. They will not find right at the bridge itself any Confederates. They will send a small number of men across to the other side to secure the eastern side, while other men are detailed to find combustibles and bring them onto the bridge. They pile them up and ignite a fire. By this time, Confederates on the other side have discovered that there are Federals at Reed's Bridge, and a little bit of a fight develops on the other side, with a fire burning on the bridge and Confederates threatening on the other side. The 69th Ohio will withdraw and march back this way and report to Dan McCook that they have burned Reed's Bridge. Unknown to Dan McCook or the 69th Ohio, just seconds after the last Federal left sight of whatever fire there was on the bridge, some of those Confederates come up and extinguish that fire. Probably mostly kick the burning material off of the bridge into the creek below. And so indeed, Reed's Bridge is not actually burned. Questions, observations? Okay. What I thought we would do is walk down along the front of McCook's line towards his right, and then beyond his initial line, and then beyond it out to the area of the skirmish line where some of the fighting begins on the right morning. What time do you think, Dave? We've got a little drainage to cross here, so just be careful going over that. But the main thing is, I want to encourage you, before we get much further south in the woods, to turn around and look back to where we've just come. Look at the monuments up there, okay? See how we are walking generally south along what is the north-south line scribed by the monument. Remember our discussion also that maybe that line needs to be back just a little bit further to the west, but we're walking along southward. One of the things that little cluster of monuments and many of the others on the battlefields, I think, gives us a false perception of sometimes is the small area in which some of these formations occupied. I think it creates for us the idea that McCook's brigade, roughly 2,000 guys, they didn't occupy a very large area, but in actuality, when you deploy them on the ground, they are stretched out over a large area.
If you look at the numbers I gave you, the 52nd Ohio is 400 men, the 85th and 371, and 420. So you have roughly 1,200 men plus the artillery. You have a front of somewhere in the neighborhood of between 350 and 425, 450 yards, depending what the intervals are between the units. So, yeah, just standing up there by the road. This is very common in places on the battlefield.
And what we're going to do is we're going to walk on southward. I'll show you real close, or approximately, or real close to where McCook's right flank was, just to give you some idea of walking across the front of this 52nd Ohio to the from their left to the right of the 86. So again, be careful crossing the lanes. You should be able to see some traffic moving east and west on the road, and in part because I've done this a couple of times, I can still see a little bit of the monuments up there, where we were. But we've now walked across the front of the 52nd and 86th Illinois. Again, might have been back just a little bit further, but they give you some idea of the frontage of those two regiments. So they say the 86th says specifically their right was in a piece of low ground, and it's this wet weather drainage right here, which we're now going to have to cross right down here.
Vampires, but very tiny vampires.
This is Captain Alan Fenstock, the commander of Company I of the 86th Illinois, and he describes his night and morning of the 19th. We halted on the bluff and went into position, put out pickets. It was a cold, frosty night. I laid out on the picket line with Lieutenant Groninger. We took our post and slept one at a time. There was some firing during the night. We captured some prisoners. The 69th Ohio, with our assistance, burned part of the bridge. We were near the center of General Longstreet's corps, a dangerous position. Not allowed to build any fire. One thing I forgot to note, he has armed himself with a Henry repeating rifle. Company commander, but he's actually sleeping on the skirmish line, and he has got a long arm with him. Saturday morning, September 19, clear and cold. Up early, built a small fire, roasted a piece of meat on a stick, eat it and some hardtack. No chance to get any water. My company was ordered as skirmishers. We crossed the holler and up the hill. We soon discovered the rebel cavalry. Got my men in good position and let the cavalry approach within 100 yards when we gave them a broadside. They had not discovered our position, so we soon cleared our front. They then run up a small battery and commenced shelling us, and that's going to be off in that direction, which we'll get to in a minute. No damage. In short time, they deployed their infantry and came for us in 3 lines. He's not actually going to encounter any infantry. It's just more cavalry fighting dismounted. In the meantime, our brigade in our rear received orders to get back to the rear as quick as possible. I let the rebel skirmishers come close when I gave the order to fire and load as we moved back down the hill, that grade that we just came up. I had only 1 slightly wounded. Company B on my left lost 4 men. Company H, 1 Lewis Lehman captured. As we were ascending the hill back towards the road, the rebel skirmish line was running down the other side, the slope that we just came up. 2 rebels in line ordered me to surrender. You Yankee son of a B. I did not appreciate it. And Dan, he does have just a B in the text here. So.
B dash dash dash.
B period. So, I did not appreciate such language, for they both drew their guns on me and fired. One ball struck close behind me, the other in front, and exploded. I jumped behind a small tree and leveled my Henry rifle 16-shooter at the small man. He jumped behind a bush, so shot at large man with a frock coat on. Barney Friss on my left says to me, "You got him." My men fired 10 rounds, and when we got back, where we left the brigade, it was gone. So I put my men in 2 ranks and marched back, never lost a man, marched back 1 mile when we found the brigade. Colonel Dan McCook had sent Captain Swift, his inspector, out to notify me to come out, but the firing on the line was too hot for him to deliver the order to me. The wonder is that we were not all captured. Probably the reason was that General Thomas was pounding away at them on our right about this time. He gets things out of sequence there a little bit, but you can imagine how he felt as he withdraws back towards where the brigade was, as skirmishers are supposed to, under pressure, gets close to the road, and what's he find? No brigade, no regiment. And we'll move off in that direction. Again, remember, they go out the Reeds Bridge Road. As they are withdrawing, they're going to come under a little bit of artillery fire that we'll talk about in just a minute. It's going to frighten one of the drivers of one of the vehicles in the battery. That battery had taken an extra limber and had a team with it, and they had turned the limber into a veterinary wagon or veterinary cart. And that driver got frightened by the artillery projectiles coming in, and he beat his team into as fast a speed as they would go, past all the rest of the vehicles in the battery column, bouncing down through the woods and past other of the troops, and is then guyed about this by his comrades for quite some time afterwards for the rapidity with which he had withdrawn from the area. Yeah. But McCook is going off now in that direction. Remember, he's going to go up and go out on that northern arm of Reeds Bridge Road.
From the Confederate side, just a little bit, the same Captain Clay I mentioned heard this initial picket contact, and he comes forward. He's aroused in the morning before dawn, and he ends up coming forward to the 1st Georgia skirmish line and finds out that there's a fairly dense Union skirmish line out here, so he starts to call for more troops coming up, and most of the 1st Georgia Cavalry comes up to fight dismounted, which is certainly, I think, what Captain Fanstock sees. And also, ultimately, at least one section of the Confederate artillery battery that's with the brigade. And interestingly enough, they later claim that they're going to bring up the 12th Tennessee Cavalry Battalion and keep it mounted and try actually a mounted charge further east of us. So this is escalating, especially from the Confederate side.
Is that Confederate artillery fire heard at Kelly's Field? There's some accounts of them hearing artillery shortly after they arrived.
Yeah, it would have been Huwald's gunfires. Okay. Any other questions right here? Dave, do we want to go back and bring Huwald on the field, and then we'll emulate the 10th Confederates? You're standing here in the woods looking at me saying, "What field?" We've come to the edge of the historic field. Earlier, when we were walking around part of the outside edge of it, we were on the south edge, and we walked westward far enough where we could see another 75 yards to the west of us, the yellow stake for that southwestern corner. That is down there, over that little rise and out of sight just a little bit. I can see the Brotherton Road, and there was a car that just passed along it a moment ago. that field edge ran north along here. There goes another car, a truck along Brotherton Road. That field corner is down there, and the field edge ran along here and right up to that stake. That's the one I couldn't see when I waded into the blackberries back there and sent you all around, so that you all didn't get to experience that joy. So we're here at the edge of the field, and there was a corner in the woods right there, corner of the field, and it then ran back to that inside corner where I rejoined you after enjoying the blackberries and sending you all around them. So again, remember this field. As the fight grows that morning after dawn between the McCook skirmishers down here and the 1st Georgia Cavalry guys pushing up in this direction, more of, as Dave related, more of the 1st Georgia Cavalry is going to be brought up and committed to this fight, fighting on foot. And Huwald's battery is going to bring at least 2 of its guns up, although some sources say the entire battery comes up.
Yeah, well, he's short one gun anyway because it's still behind and then it comes up.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So.
At least the 2 mountain howitzers come up here and join the fight. They actually set up out there in the field, and there is a tablet for them. We'll see that as we go back. Many of you all can see your vehicles parked along Jays Mill Road there. If this were proper, the landscape were proper, you'd have a clear view of them, because all of that in front of you would have been open field. Davidson's men who are engaged will begin to push McCook's skirmishers back. McCook's skirmishers begin withdrawing, as skirmishers are supposed to under pressure if they can't hold the enemy back. And of course they'll then find that the rest of the brigade is disappearing. Now, just out here along the edge of the road is what? The spring. That spring that morning had attracted a lot of Federals. In fact, several of the regiments in McCook's brigade will relate that, having learned of the spring, those regiments form formal canteen details, where soldiers are detailed to each carry quite a few canteens of their comrades, and then that cluster of soldiers, weighted down with quite a few canteens, will go forward. In this case, they carry their muskets or rifles with them. They go forward, and they will reach the spring, or some of them reach the spring, and they actually begin to fill their canteens when the Confederate cavalry pushes up. Some of the Federals filling their canteens stay a little bit too long and will be captured in the area of the spring as Davidson's cavalry pushes into the area. But in addition to the skirmishers out here for the Federals, you've got these guys with lots of canteens on them. And Brian and Preston, have you ever been detailed as part of a canteen detail?
Sure, very heavy.
Yeah, it's very heavy. So imagine how weighted down those guys are. So in addition to some of the skirmishers actually fighting, what do you have now going back through them but these guys with bunches of canteens on going back towards the brigade line? But now the Confederate cavalry is pushing up into this area. Huwald comes up and begins firing. Most of the Federal accounts suggest that Huwald's fire is high, going over their heads, but their projectiles are crashing through the treetops and then exploding downrange. As the Confederates push northwestward, McCook is going to withdraw, and eventually the 1st Georgia Cavalry guys and some of Davidson's other men will figure out that these Federals that they've had contact with are withdrawing. And of course, that's McCook going out the Reeds Bridge Road on the northern arm of it. And once they reach the Lafayette Road, in the area today of the intersection of Forest Road and the Lafayette Road, in the area of Sears Shoe Store and Fine's Gas Appliance, Mitchell and McCook turn north on the Lafayette Road and march northward. There is a Union Cincinnati Gazette correspondent who has marched with Thomas overnight, has arrived with Baird's division in Kelly's Field. He knows Gordon Granger is somewhere to the north, and he rides north from the Kelly Field up onto the McDonald Farm where the Visitor Center is, and on northward. And there, from the south, he sees a Federal column come out of the woods to the east of the Lafayette Road, along the northern arm of Reeds Bridge Road, reach the Lafayette Road, and turn and ride northward. He will then ride up himself to join that column eventually. But what he relates, and why I'm telling this story, is that when he first sees that column turning north on the Lafayette Road, he sees a courier ride south from the column towards him. And as that courier rides south from the edge of the woods, he is fired upon by Confederates. That puts Confederates where? Almost to the Lafayette Road, north of the McDonald Farm, the Visitor Center, north of the Kelly Field. Not a great number of them, but it does put some Confederates further to the west. But it is in this same time that McCook is interacting with Thomas and convincing Thomas that there is this low-hanging fruit out here, that one lone brigade. Davidson will disengage. Will withdraw these troops. More of the brigade will, Davidson's brigade will come forward, and in the greater area of the spring, the men of Davidson's brigade will be gathered. Many of them themselves trying to cook a little breakfast, boil some coffee, or heat some water, filling canteens at the spring, and right near there, the spring, there is a confab between Nathan Bedford Forrest, who is now on the scene, and John Pegram, and although he's unnamed, maybe, probably, Henry Davidson. But nobody mentions him being present. But certainly he probably was. And from this, it is decided that there will be a little more reconnoitering out to the west to see what's going on.
Captain Clay, the staff officer, the Confederate staff officer, actually leads a patrol out here somewhere into the woods going that way, and comes back. He says he's out there about 15-20 minutes. He heard nothing but, to quote him, bird song. So he comes back. He goes back into the field. He reports to Forrest that there doesn't seem to be any more Federals in the area. He lays down to take a nap, actually. And shortly after this, probably as a matter of simple flank security, a patrol of the 10th Confederate Cavalry is sent out here in the same direction, and they'll find a much different result than Clay does.
And we're going to emulate that in just a moment ourselves. So questions or observations right here.
What time of the day are we here?
This is 7 a.m., a little after 7.
One thing about General McCook, Colonel McCook, Daniel McCook rides back to the Reeds Bridge Road. He finds, according to an officer in the 21st Wisconsin who happened to be nearby, he finds General Thomas laying down on a tarp right near the Kelly house. And he rides up and he explains fairly excitedly that he has a brigade of Confederates in the woods. If enough troops are sent after them, we'll capture the whole command. Thomas Thomas is his usual laconic self. McCook also is very eager to stay and fight. He asks Thomas at least twice, by some observers, to countermand his orders to go back to Rossville, and Thomas declines. He says, "I don't know what General Granger is facing, and I'm not going to override those orders. I'm not going to take the authority to take your troops away from Granger." So, a very frustrated and unhappy Colonel McCook, I am having trouble with that.
Well, in search of a star. You just want him to have a star.
There's so many of those damn McCooks anyway.
Yes. You can't go wrong saying General McCook somewhere. But in any case, Colonel McCook rides back up the road, and he's very unhappy and encounters another of the Union brigadiers and says something to the effect that I have to go to the rear, and you're going to go off in the woods and get the glory and the star.
Does he? I thought I read somewhere that he actually says that to Croxton. Is it Croxton or someone else?
Yes, I think it might be Croxton. I'd check my references. But he has contact with Starkweather. He has contact with Croxton. He has contact with a number of junior officers, report seeing him. So who exactly he said it to, I could look it up. But
Am I correct that McCook was Thomas's chief of staff during the Shiloh campaign?
Daniel McCook?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay. I thought I had.
I don't think he's in Thomas's command. The 52nd Ohio isn't.
Let's say, wasn't he colonel of the 52nd Ohio?
He was colonel of the 52nd Ohio.
So just to get some perspective on this, did this all happen in less time than we just spent talking about it?
Yes.
Okay.
The stuff since daylight. Well, I don't know.
It's going to take, daylight's, 5:30ish in the morning. Jim will probably know. Maybe it's closer to 6 because it's...
Sunrise is 5:47 the next day, so it's...
Yeah. So daylight is 5:30. The first light probably is about 5:15. The 69th Ohio goes out before dawn, so we're really talking about, 2.5, 3 hours, maybe more. So.
No, you are correct. According to Werner, Dan McCook, let's see, during the summer '61, McCook served as captain of the 1st Kansas Infantry and was present at Wilson's Creek. He was subsequently chief of staff of Thomas's 1st Division, Army of the Ohio, during the Shiloh campaign, although these troops did not arrive in time to take part in the battle. So now,
he knew all these guys. I mean, he served with Croxton and
well,
because Croxton had been with Thomas essentially since Mills Creek.
Werner has to compress things pretty dramatically here. Might need to look a little more specifically at exactly where the time frame is, but yeah, from the spring of '62, he has some familiarity with.
It's an example of how you can spend a lot of time studying this sort of horizontally and not. There's more things to look at vertically. I didn't know that. Thank you.
And he had been law partner with Sherman and Thomas Ewing. So. So are you using a descendant of that firm today, Glenn?
They do have a monument. The building is no longer extant, but there's a monument there that talks about it. Of course, Sherman talks about it in his memoirs and how poor a lawyer he thought himself to be. He liked to do the work in the back room, and one day the guy that was going to do the trial stuff didn't show up, and he had to do it. He said, well, I really botched it. So it was not a successful venture. The town was 6 years old at the time they were there. They go on to greater things.
than lawyers in Leavenworth.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. Do you want to say anything more about the patrol, or are we ready to patrol?
I think we're ready.
We're ready to patrol. Okay.
Well, I would say goodbye to you here.
Under Colonel Good was sent out here, like we said back there, as flank security, basically. And they moved into the woods. They were mounted, and their job was basically to patrol to the west. They were replicating Captain Clay's mission of earlier. And unlike Captain Clay, they stumble into a line of Union skirmishers moving through the woods at them this way. Now, about 300 yards through the woods here is the brigade monuments, the regimental monuments for Cruxton's brigade of Brannan's division, 14th Army Corps. Cruxton's men, after Dan McCook has had his conversation with George Thomas, and Thomas has decided to go ahead and follow McCook's advice and go after this brigade out here. Cruxton's men come forward just a little ways into the woods near Kelly Field, and they deploy into 3 regiments forward and 2 regiments back, and they begin to move slowly through the woods here. They're not pushing fast, and that's partly because Cruxton knows that another Union brigade has gone out to Reed's Bridge Road. That's Ferdinand Vanderveer's brigade, and they're supposed to move down Reed's Bridge Road, and they're going to come together kind of as a pincer movement. Brannan's 3rd Brigade, under Colonel John Connell, is with 3 regiments, is moving up in reserve. So this whole division is now in motion after this 1 brigade, and Thomas reinforces that movement in a few minutes by ordering Absalom Baird's 3 brigades to begin to move west as well behind Brannan in case Brannan needs help. So the 10th Confederate has approximately 250 men. I don't know if in this patrol the whole regiment went or just a portion of it, but in any case it was a sizable portion. It was at least 150 men, I think, because they run into the brigade skirmish line of Croxton's men moving through the woods. And at least 2 regiments in Croxton's brigade talk about encountering them, so the Confederates are in turn spread out pretty widely. And the Confederates see this Union skirmish line in the woods. And being Confederate cavalry, they decide to chase the Union skirmish line. They actually will charge down through the woods here. And the Union infantry skirmishers, seeing the Confederates coming, fall back very quickly to their main line, and before the 10th Confederate really knows it, they're suddenly up on a Union battle line of 3 regiments forward of approximately 1,300 men. And those 3 Federal regiments open fire with sustained volleys, and the Confederate 10th Confederate Cavalry immediately begins to retreat back towards Kelly Field, or towards Jays Mill Field. That movement is not a controlled movement. It is a rout. Colonel Good is unable to control his men, and for the rest of the approximately 1,600 or 1,700 men in Davidson's brigade that are camped out there in the field, suddenly out of the woods pour this wave of mounted Confederates, horses that are riderless, men that are hatless. One of the Confederates in the 6th Georgia Cavalry, a guy named J.W. Minnick, who we've talked about. If you've been on me with trips before, you certainly know we talk about Minnick because he writes extensively about this battle. Minnick says that they pour out of the woods in a complete panic and shout basically, "Get boys, the Yankees are full of woods." The woods are full of Yankees. Boy, I'm a little tongue-tied today. As a matter of fact, Colonel Good falls into line with some of the other regiments. Another member of the 6th Georgia reports that Colonel Good halts with the 6th Georgia. He's so disgusted with his own men because they don't rally that he basically says, "I'll fight with you guys." What happens next is essentially a defensive reaction. Forrest and Pegram, and presumably Henry B. Davidson, put the Confederate cavalry dismounted into line, and they try and form a defensive position approximately on this line of monuments. And they're probably heavily outmatched. For one thing, there's a roster strength of 1,900 men in Pegram's brigade. If you deduct the standard 1/4 for horse holders, now we're down to no more than 1,400 or 1,500 men. And then we take out the 250, say, of the 10th Confederate, because at the moment they're in no condition to do any fighting. So we could be at 12 or 1,300 men. And they're deployed in battle line, not in skirmish formation, to try and hold this ridge against Cruxton's brigade. And Cruxton has a total of 2,000 men, but he only has his first line engaged here initially. The other thing that's interesting about it is that Cruxton sees no reason to push forward this severely. For one thing, why make a frontal attack on this line when you know there's another brigade coming up on your left in support that theoretically can envelop this Confederate line and develop it, if it's short enough, even flank it and overrun it. So the monuments placed this action at about 7:30 in the morning. That roughly corresponds with the Union accounts of the action. But for the next 20 or 30 minutes at least, what we don't have is a push and shove match here. What we have is a static firefight. And Forrest decides that he's going to fight it out. He calls forward the horse holders. He sends a staff officer back to round up the horse holders and bring them up to the line, and tie the horses to the trees.
Fetch them here.
A dangerous move, because if the brigade if the brigade does get enfiladed or routed, they're going to lose an awful lot of horses. But then Forrest also starts appealing for help, and within a few minutes he will go looking for help himself. And
First thing he does is send a staff officer off for his next closest potentially available brigade, the Grell's brigade.
Right.
But it's going to be a while before that guy can ride down, get them, and bring them back up here.
Debrell is on the other end of the battlefield. Debrell is down with Polk's corps somewhere opposite Glass Mill, or Lee and Gordon's Mill. So Debrell is several miles away. Forrest has been asking for those guys back for a couple of days, actually, and they were supposed to have been replaced by Wheeler on the 18th so that they could come north, but that hasn't happened. That's a whole other story. Buy the book, you can read about it. But in any case, without any immediate support from Debrell, Forrest sends a message to Bragg, who by this time has come onto the field, asking for infantry support, and also he doesn't wait for that support to come. He rides down and commandeers an infantry brigade of William Henry Talbot Walker's corps, the Confederate Reserve Corps. Colonel Claudius Wilson's Georgia Brigade is ordered by Granger to go support Forrest, is ordered by Walker to go support Forrest, and the brigade that Forrest commandeers is Matthew Ector's brigade of 1,300 men, a mixed brigade, North Carolina, Texas. And so Forrest has suddenly upped the ante here. Now that's an interesting decision to me. It always has been. Forrest didn't necessarily have to fight for this ridge so stubbornly. He could have simply tried to conduct some sort of screening movement and fallen back to the south. However, that's certainly not Forrest's personality. He's going to fight. And he's immediately going to start calling the infantry forward. And we probably won't have time to talk much about the fight back up on Reed's Bridge Road. We've talked about that on other sessions. But suffice to say that Ector's brigade will go into action up there against Ferdinand Vanderveer. But Wilson will come up from the south end of the field and go forward on
We'll see that
Henry B.
was.
Davidson's line facing this. Wilson's men will come up on Davidson's left and strike Croxton.